emphasis on at-risk students and including projects targeting school climate change, student dropout, graduation and retention rates, including the implementation of academic, social, and emotional supports for Adventist schools. In fact, this is where Mindy's passion lies. Currently, she's partnered with the La Sierra University Center for Conflict Resolution and is piloting a school counseling service. To assist us with initial connection here, I'm going to ask a question, but I do want everyone to just keep their answers very quiet and personal. Don't answer loud, don't put it in the chat. That's not the point, but I do think you'll want to think carefully a moment. Here's the question. Would you rather have to deal with a toxic colleague or a toxic family member? Which would you rather have to deal with, a toxic colleague or a toxic family member? Obviously, we would hope that no one would have to choose either option, right? Well, in the same way that we look to contextualize students through a trauma-informed lens, Mindy is going to help us this afternoon with utilizing the same framework for workplace trauma prevention and intervention for ourselves and our employees. So settle in for an excellent presentation. Mindy, we are so thankful you are here with us today. The time is yours.
Tamara, thank you so much for having me. Really, truly, like this is just such an honor for me. And I'm so grateful to Keith for inviting me because I am through and through a Southern Union girl. I was born in Gulf States. I lived in Georgia, in Tennessee, and then have also worked in those states as well. And so my heart is there. I feel a true connection. In fact, even though I have been a Midwestern now for almost a decade, even just being with you guys, I may have my Southern twang come out just a little bit because I feel like I am a part of you today. But today, and I say this morning because it's still this morning where I am at, I live in Chicagoland, but I happen to be today in the Tom's Zapara Business Center, School of Business at La Sierra University, where the Center for Conflict Resolution is based. So I have served for the center for 9 years and doing the work of restorative practicing and bullying prevention. But this is, I've always done it remotely. So I'm now looking out the window at palm trees, and I'm actually in the Center for Conflict Resolution, which it's just my honor to represent the center. So I have chosen a kind of a different learning modality, and some of you might be familiar with it. But in your chat is a link to a Nearpod learning platform, if you will, today. There's actually two. I want you to choose the second one that I posted at 10:32. I'm going to post it once more. This is a way rather than PowerPoint to make it really interactive so that we can enjoy our time together and connect in a real way. So if you would, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to log in, and that's how we are going to view our presentation today. But I wanted to give you kind of what I always do. And my friend Kim Thompson there in Georgia Cumberland knows this because she's watched me do a gazillion trainings. But for me, it is so important whenever I'm doing a mental health presentation or an educational presentation to look at it through a biblical lens, because that's really what we're all about, right? Is that uniqueness that makes us powerful in a special way that other school systems do not have. And so today I wanted to take a look at the story of Jacob. And as you access your Nearpod link, I wanted to set the stage a little bit. Okay, so let's think back, think way back into the story of Jacob. And we're going to pick up after he has tricked, and he was a tricker, after he has tricked Esau out of his birthright. You remember that, right? The fuzzy arms and, the stew. You remember all of that, right? So here we are. We're picking up right after that. And here is Jacob, and he's fleeing. And this is what Patriarchs and Prophets says on page 1831. I love this. With only his staff in hand, he must travel hundreds of miles through a country inhabited by wild roving tribes. In his remorse and timidity, he sought to avoid men lest he should be traced by his angry brother. He feared that he had lost forever the blessing that God had purposed to give him, and Satan was at hand to press temptations upon him. So I think it's fair to say that Jacob was in the lowest spot of his entire life, right? He literally is this loner nomad, escaping, fleeing, and he is just incredibly broken. And he's traveling, miles and miles. So he's physically exhausted, and he lays down with a stone for his pillow. And that's when the angels, the dream and the angels on the ladder happen. And then he ends up wrestling with an angel, right? And he has this injured hip. And so I'm putting myself in Jacob's shoes a little bit this morning, and I'll just be transparent. Because in a way, I have really been wrestling with this topic in this presentation. I've just prayed over it for about 3 months. And I shared with Tamara that, the Holy Spirit has laid this on my heart and impressed me when Keith requested that I speak on the topic of emotional support. And the request was emotional support through the lens of recruiting, supporting, and retaining great teachers. And so in this Holy Spirit nudge to address workplace trauma, I've struggled, I've wrestled, just like Jacob, because I battle if I'm the right person to have this conversation with you. The truth is that I bring my own personal injury. We all do, right? My own career baggage. And I'll share a little bit of that later with you. But it has felt very similar to Jacob battling with the angel while injured and at a disadvantage. So when I think about Jacob fleeing and the kind of shape he's in, I want us to take a look at our first trauma-informed tale. All right. So we're going to watch a video. Hopefully all of you, I've got 26 participants in Nearpod. You're awesome. Well done. All right. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at trauma tale number 1, Jacob and Laban. And here's the video. Hopefully you can hear the sound. Let me make sure. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you're able to hear the sound. I'm going to play just a little bit.
After running away from Esau because he tricked him out of his father's blessing, Jacob ran to his uncle Laban's house. He stayed with Laban for a month and worked for him, taking care of his animals.
Okay, so here's our first interaction. This was Jacob's interview period, okay? So he shows up to the well, okay? And here's what I love. He normally the shepherds would give him water, or the females would give him water, but instead he dips the bucket into the well, and he kind of does this preliminary like service to show his intentions, right? So this is his interview period. He has a few weeks under Laban's employment as a testing period. He's kind of a candidate. So what candidacy qualifications do you believe Jacob held that worked in favor with him getting the job? What growth areas do you believe made him a not so ideal candidate? All right, go ahead and put your answers in and I'll kind of read them aloud. All right, what worked favorably for him as a candidate? And then what were some not so ideal qualities that didn't work in favor of him? Okay, thank you, Matt. So he had taken care of sheep back home. I love it. So he's got prior experience, right? I love that. So he comes with a skill set, but he was dishonest, right? I doubt that he put that on his resume and his portfolio, right? Dishonest and cheated brother out of birthright. Good, thanks, Matt. Looking for some more answers. Thanks, Jeff. He was organized. He was creative. He was planning. I'm sorry. He was organized. He had creative planning, but he was known for not telling the truth. Okay, so yeah, dishonest again. Yeah. And I like what you said too, Jeff, this reputation, right? There was a reputation that preceded him. Good. Okay. Oh, Rose, thank you so much. Okay, he put himself first. Okay, his priorities were out of line. Okay, let's continue with our Jacob and Laban trauma tale. Here we go.
Laban wanted to pay Jacob for his work, so he asked Jacob what he wanted. Jacob asked to marry Laban's younger daughter, Rachel. She was beautiful, and Jacob loved her. Laban said that if Jacob worked for him for 7 years, he could marry Rachel.
Okay, so here again, what were the terms and conditions of the employment agreement? Given the custom of the day, now remember that custom, that normally the one who was wooing the daughter came with a substantial dowry, but Jacob did not have a dowry at all, right? So given the custom of the day, does this seem like a fair employee-employer arrangement? Why or why not? Okay, think about the conditions of that employment agreement. Okay, Remy says, no, it was extremely unfair, okay? So I'm guessing that like the scales were tipped in Laban's favor, right? Thanks for saying that, Remy. Chad said he had to work for 7 years, which seems a bit excessive. That does. I haven't done any kind of the currency research or anything, but in a little bit, we'll see how Laban changed the wages of Jacob over that 7-year period. Good. I'm looking for one more. Denise, he had to work for 7 years. Yes, because he did not have a dowry. Thank you for saying that. Okay. Yeah. So it was a custom. So Jacob is coming into this culture that is unfamiliar, and he's really just at the mercy and working to whatever specifications are given him. Okay, let's continue our story. All right. Aside from wanting to marry Rachel, what other reasons might have kept Jacob in Laban's employment, even having already experienced one work trauma? Okay, so think about that. Even had he not been tricked and married Rachel right off the bat, what other reasons might Jacob have stayed in Laban's employment? What would have been some motivators, even though it was dysfunctional, even though it was toxic? Why might he have stayed? Okay. Oh, thanks, Jeff. Okay. Family connection. Where else would he go? Right? Absolutely. Thank you. Peggy. Hi, Peggy. Few or no other options, right? Like he was essentially stuck. He didn't have any other options. Chad says his love for Rachel. Phil William says pressure from Laban's daughters and his wives. So, I mean, even now we can contextualize that and think about the pressure we feel to be close to family and the importance of that, right? So why would Rachel and Leah want to leave grandparents and the only culture that they had known? Lori said to get final reward, 100%. Keith said fear of leaving. Yes. Remy says he must have liked his environment. Awesome. Great feedback. Okay. Here's the conclusion of the Jacob and Laban video. Here we go.
Jacob and Laban were both tricksters, and because of their sins, they caused great big trouble for each other and their families. But the good news is that God can even save the trickiest of tricksters, like Jacob and Laban. In fact, Jacob and Leah had a son named Judah, and Judah's family grew and grew until one day a very special great-grandson of Judah was born, Jesus. Jesus died on the cross for tricksters like Jacob and Laban. And even better, on the third day, he rose from the dead.
So I love that conclusion because there's a happy ending there. It happened way after Laban and Jacob had died, but the restoration that happened, and that's where we're going. That end goal of uplifting Christ and celebrating his restorative practice. So let's think back again to Jacob as a candidate, and I think of myself as a senior first semester education major at Southern Adventist University. And I can still remember my black pinstripe skirt suit that I wore and black heels. And I walked into the collegial church. I think it was probably like early teen room. You guys probably do it differently now. And then all of your stations were set up and I just rotated, boom, boom, boom. And I had nerves, but I and back then, by the way, portfolios were this thick in a massive binder. So I'm lugging around this binder and I can still remember sitting across from the table and then walking away with several soft offers. And one was Gulf State, which I wrestled with, a two teacher school. And then one was Carmen there in Marietta. So I think back to that candidacy and having like now interviewed, hundreds of, maybe not hundreds, but dozens of collegiates, right? I think back to Jacob as the candidate. And so I think of him as after he tricked Esau Jacob had, and here's the thing, he's not this prime candidate, right? He's not coming in with this impressive portfolio. He had lost all confidence in himself. He was utterly lonely and in distress, right? So from that, we can deduce that Jacob, as a candidate coming into this workplace situation, he was a social outcast. He was not welcomed in his own family or country. He had a history of being a trickster and making bad mistakes. He had a fragile mental health stability, and his physical health was compromised by the journey, right? So he had traveled this long journey, and so now his physical health is beat down. And so when I translate that to our teacher candidates, I think of all of our teachers, whether they're new applicants or whether they're oldie goldies, as being commodities. And I tell them that, like when I do teacher trainings, I say, you are a commodity and we have to preserve you. But in order to preserve our commodities, we have to think about them in the same lens that we are working to become trauma informed for our students, right? Because students grow up to be adults. Students grow up to be employees. And so we need to have an understanding around the mental health that comes and the baggage that comes, just like Jacob was coming with baggage. So we think of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, that manifests itself. And when I say these characteristics, you are likely going to think of some employee that you have that is already manifesting this. So it manifests itself in rigidity, reactivity, inconsistency, and shifting between competency and overwhelm. All right. More prone to PTSD are females. And I want you to think about how many of our teacher employees are female. What percentage of your SDA educator workforce is female? So they are at a higher rate for PTSD. And then finally, prior traumatic life events. So these are things that have happened in their past, such as child abuse, or we think of, domestic violence. Such trauma puts these individuals at a higher risk for depression, anxiety, illness, and substance abuse. So that's something to think in mind when we're looking at candidates and we're interviewing them, is that they're coming with their own set of baggage. And I just wanted to show this funny interview clip. Kim and Kevin, you know this guy. This is a school counselor, former principal, who's laying it out about how interviews typically go down. Here we go. Let's see if it'll work for me.
Thank you so much for coming to our second round of interview questions. We have narrowed it down to you three. We appreciate you being here. Over here, we've got 9 intermediate teachers that are interviewing with us. And over here, we got 16 primary teachers. But don't be nervous with all these people. Just remember that your answers are going to decide whether you get this job or not, okay? And right here behind us, we got our parents. We're only supposed to have 3, but 9 of them showed up. You don't need to know their names because you'll know their names the first week of school. Okay, so we like to be a little bit creative on our questions, just to be able to see what you are like. So we will ask all 3 of you the same question, and you just give your most natural answer, okay? Question number 1, what do you bring to the table? Okay, what are you going to bring to our school? Okay, Miss Smith, you're a team player. Okay, well, I appreciate that answer, okay, but here's the deal. You're going to be on the 4th grade team, and it's run by that teacher down there with the ornery face, crossing her arms. She's a bully teacher. We don't need no team player, okay? Because you're just going to do whatever she says. So I appreciate the honesty, but I'll come back to you. What do you bring? Okay, yes. What do you bring to the table? You have a great knowledge of reading. Okay, let me rephrase the question. Good answer, but let me rephrase the question. What do you bring to us as a people? Okay, like, do you have a Tom shirt in a Myrtle Beach? Do you know how to cut hair? Something like that. What do you bring to us? Okay. Yes, I'll start down here. Yes, sir. What do you bring? Okay. You got a community pool in your neighborhood we could swim at? Now there you community pool. Excellent. Yes, ma'am. Your husband's a fireman and he can come with his friends to career day. Well, I know that those teachers love that answer. Yes, ma'am. You can teach yoga after school. Yoga, let me write that one down. I appreciate it. Thank you for telling us what you bring to the table. Question number 2 is really, really simple. Sharpies or Flair pens? Yes, sir. Flair pens. Yes, sir. Flair pens. Yes, ma'am. Colored pencils. Honey, look, I'm using a Flair pen right here. Okay. Let me write that down. Color. I'm going to write it right under yoga. Colored pencils. Okay, lastly, we want you to tell us which of these best describes your teaching styles. This pool noodle, okay, this watermelon Kool-Aid cup, or some cream corn. Okay, which of these 3 describes you as a teacher? Okay, yes, sir. The pool noodle, why? Because you provide safety for the kids. Like, okay, that was kind of cool, just kind of neat. Yes, ma'am. Okay. The watermelon cup, why? Because you like to fill your kids with knowledge. Good. Yes, ma'am. The watermelon cup. Well, she already said the watermelon cup. Okay. I probably would have gone with the cream corn, but okay, why? Oh, because you like to spread seeds of knowledge. Okay, good one. Okay, I just let you know that the correct answer was cream corn, because you're sweet and there's plenty to go around. Okay. So we will be making our decision very quickly. We will call you after school. We appreciate you coming in.
Okay, I know it's a bit cheesy, but I would maybe steal that whole pool noodle and cream corn and watermelon cup analogy. All right, so question for you. What qualities do you consider most important for potential employees? Okay, what are you looking for when you are looking for candidates? Awesome. Thank you, Tammy. Love of Jesus and mission focused. Celestine, team player. Thank you for saying that. That's awesome. Thanks, Remy. Joy and loves Jesus. Wow. I appreciate that, Joy. Passion for the ministry of education. Thanks, Phil. Okay, Marilee said flexibility. Barbara said loves children. Glenn said love for kids. That's awesome. Thank you. Lovely said dedicated and innovative. Liberta said teachable. Jeff said centered on Christ and students. Celestine said commitment to our students. Yeah. Rose said transparency. Wow. That's profound. Loves kids, willing to learn and fail to growth. Yeah, that's awesome. And Cheryl, hi Cheryl, said honesty and good work ethic. Lovely said purpose driven. That's awesome. Thank you for your input. So here we have then the contract, right? The contract between Laban and Jacob. And here is Laban as the employer. For those candidates who did not meet the custom standard, provision was made, and to me this word is so key, to test those who had nothing to pay. This ancient custom, though sometimes abused, okay? So we've got testing an employee and we've got an abuse of an employee, as by Laban was productive of good results. So here's Laban in a nutshell. He has the upper hand and power in the working relationship. Kim, I know what's dinging in your head, right? The power of imbalance or strength that we talk about all the time in Old Vegas bullying prevention, right? He was selfish and worked circumstances to his advantage, right? So he's really kind of moving pawn pieces to get the end result that he wants, not necessarily what's fair. And then he crafts the work contract with ambiguities and fine print clauses that he can manipulate, right? So here's Jacob as the employee. He's gone through his candidacy. He's gone through his interview process. He's been an intern. Here he is as an employee. Even with all his previous trauma, Jacob moved forward in faith, trusting God's promise. And here's this promise. And I love this, and I hold on to this too as someone who is damaged. Behold, I am with thee and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. You just gave me the top qualities that you're looking for in a candidate. And several of you said that call to education, right? The commitment to education. And here is his very loud, ringing in his ears call direct from God, right? So he is called to servant leadership. He's faithful to God and to his, and to his employer, but was an outsider to the culture and the dynamics, which put him at a power disadvantage. And I think about our Adventist cultures, each very unique, each in their little hub and their own uniquenesses. I think about coming in to something like that and not having the connections and the network and having to really work your way into relationship rather than just instantly having it. So here is Jacob and the job. Here's what it looks like. The shepherd's life of diligence, and this is Ellen White, in chapter 17 of Patriarchs and Prophets, the shepherd's life of diligence and caretaking and his tender compassion for the helpless creatures entrusted to his charge has been employed. So here he is caring for helpless sheep. And I traveled this week and passed, I've never seen herds of thousands of sheep and like for real sheepdogs running around like on this just flat landscape. And here he is, and this is his whole role. Jacob was held responsible for large flocks. He was a hands-on protector of the herd, and he had high standards. This is a quote. He had high standards of himself as an employee and insisted that his sheep be in flourishing condition. So here's the question. That's a bit cut off, but you can see where I'm getting at. How was Jacob's job similar to that of your educators? How was Jacob's job similar to that of your educators? Okay, this is a time when you can unmute yourself and talk to me, or you can write it in the chat, either one. Hey, let me hear from you. You're so quiet. Oh, thank you, Rose. We create conditions for our students to flourish, okay? Oh, thanks for taking that language, right? So our whole role is to create an educator environment for the students to flourish, just like Jacob's role was to create an environmental place for those sheep to flourish. Anybody else? Who else can share with me? Either unmute or type. Thanks, Kim. So we work with the flock we are given. Okay, I love that because it's a twofer, and I know you meant it that way too, my friend. We work with the flock we're given. So as classroom educators, we work with the student flock we're given, right? Some sheep have limps, some sheep are undersized, some sheep are bossy, whatever it is. So we work with the student dynamics that we're given. In the same way as principals, administrators, and superintendents, we work with the educator flock that we are given with their, I have a friend who calls them prickly personalities, with their prickly personalities, with their idiosyncrasies, with their weird habits, with their family or health dynamics, all of those things. We work with the flock we're given. Oh, Dr. Bishop, hi, my sweet friend. He and we should be committed to excellence. So Jacob was committed to excellence, and toward the end, we'll talk about everything he did, even in the face of job trauma, that was excellent. Thank you for sharing. Okay, so we've done the interview, the candidate, we've done the contract. Now there is the conflict. And I think in Adventist circles, we call things that are really work trauma, we call them conflict. Or I was in a work conflict last year as part of the education conference office for my local conference. And we called it things went sideways, right? So we really kind of tiptoe around giving it the language that it deserves. But here is the conflict between Jacob and Laban. This is straight from Patriarchs and Prophets. For 20 years, Jacob remained in Mesopotamia, laboring in the service of Laban, who, disregarding the ties of kinship, was bent on securing to himself all the benefits of their connection. 14 years of toil he demanded for his 2 daughters, and during the remaining period, Jacob's wages were 10 times changed. Yet Jacob's service was diligent and faithful. His words to Laban in their last interview vividly describe the untiring vigilance which he had given to the interests of his exacting master. This 20 years have I been with thee, that which was torn of beasts I brought not unto thee. In other words, the sheep that were ripped up, I didn't bring them to you. I bore the loss of it. In other words, I paid for them out of my own pocket. Of my hand didst thou require it. Thus I was the day the drought consumed me, and the frost by night, and my sleep departed from my eyes. So this is a guy who is out in the fields. He's shivering. He's thirsty in the drought, he's cold, and he's sleepless. So when I think about the sacrifices that are portrayed there, let's answer this. What were the sacrifices that Jacob did in his role that Laban wasn't even aware of? Do you think things would have been different if Laban had known the good employee things Jacob was doing? Why or why not? Okay, I'll give you a minute to respond.
I believe Laban, he wasn't interested so much in the good that was being done. He had an alternative motive, and that is, before you get the prize, Jacob, that you want, I'm going to work your fingers to the bone. So he was greedy. So I don't know if he would have noticed any difference if he had seen the good that he was doing. Laban had something else on his mind.
100%. Thank you so much for saying that. So even had he known all the good things, his motives weren't in the right place. So he wouldn't have acknowledged those good things. A, he wasn't looking for them, and B, they didn't matter. Right? Wow. Thank you for that insight. Anybody else, either unmute or write on this on the Nearpod. Lovely said, I don't think things would have been different. He had his mind set on getting as much out of him as he could, right? He used and abused. That abuse word is straight from Ellen White. Keith says, no, Laban was only interested in his bottom line. 100%. Yep. The financial gain of it was really the driving piece for him. Rose said, Laban may not have seen it at all. Laban may not have seen it all, but he saw the effects of a well cared for sheep. It wouldn't make any difference. He had eye, but could not see. Wow. I love that. He had eye, but could not see. Because his eye was focused on a different prize. Remy said he treated Laban's property as his own. I don't think Laban would have been different because he was not in it for others, but for himself. Yes, absolutely. And Doris, Laban only paid attention to getting the work done. Yeah, he didn't care how it was done or how well it was done as long as he was thriving, right? Thank you so much. Okay, so we've done the candidates, we've done the contract, we've done the conflict, and here is the career trauma, and here's what it looks like. Again, we call it kind of these fluffy words, but here's how career trauma is defined. Trauma is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience, and it's derived from the 17th century word wound. An event is more likely to be experienced as a trauma when a person perceives the incident to be, and here are kind of those factors that lead to it being trauma: unexpected, something that they were unprepared for, uncontrollable, or the result of intentional cruelty, or if it's somehow related to a childhood event. Remember, we talked about how trauma triggers trauma. So if you have career trauma, it could trigger past trauma experiences. We talked about childhood sexual abuse. We talked about PTSD. We talked about domestic violence, those kinds of things. Potential workplace trauma could include bullying, threats, harassment, betrayal, maliciousness, extreme isolation, chronic pressure, unresolved conflict, toxic work environment, uncertainty. I'm on 10, fear of the future, downsizing, or fear of unemployment. So that's 12 different things that could contribute to workplace trauma. So I want us to kind of break down career trauma or workplace trauma through the lenses of our educators, through the lenses of leaders, whether you're superintendent, whether you're administrator, and then kind of break that down into what tales and tools can be used. So career trauma, and here's the prevalence. A recent poll asked respondents to rank workplace events that cause the most trauma. And here are the three that they listed, the top three: employer announcing job loss. So that was 28%. Workplace violence or harassment or bullying was 25%. And then death of a colleague. And I added this because I think probably many of us can relate to this actually. Death of a colleague or death of a student was 19%. So we can see there that career trauma can either happen with natural events that cannot be prevented. So death of a colleague, those kinds of things. But however, it's important as an organization to prepare employees how to respond to potential trauma in a way that reduces the risk of harm to themselves and others. Oops. So, when we talk about workplace trauma, it's kind of this elephant in the room that we don't talk about actually. But in the same way that Jacob had those physiological symptoms, remember, like he was sleepless, he couldn't sleep. Here are how workplace trauma events manifest themselves in our psyche and in our physical well-being. You can feel numb. You can have trouble sleeping, trouble concentrating. You may have an inability to maintain regular routine, unprompted bursts of anger or aggression, a feeling constant pressure to overwork, right? To prove yourself. So I'm just going to work like a dog. Digestive issues like irritable bowel syndrome, anxiety, panic attacks, and depression. Relationship issues such as withdrawal from family and friends. I just finished listening to a podcast where this group of evangelical pastors were going through a very dysfunctional team, and the workplace trauma that they were experiencing literally broke down their marriages, right? So they were sleeping in the guest bedrooms and weren't talking to their spouses and were keeping secrets from their spouses because of that workplace trauma. And then finally, nightmares. So here's the long-term impact. And this comes from Lexi McMiniman from Work Life about 6 months ago. Workers having experienced career trauma report long-term impact on their careers, such as changing how they make career decisions, how they perceive safety in the workplace, how they interact with their superiors, and more. Well, after leaving a job, people shared that anything from retracing their old commute to otherwise banal office socializing might induce chest pains, muscle spasms, and more, right? So they're having triggers, and it really impacts their future profession of how they handle job at all. So in How to Heal from Workplace Trauma, Charmaine says, some of the most traumatizing things a person can experience can happen in the workplace. Pervasive, targeted actions happen at work. What makes it so dangerous is that there are too many opportunities to hide or explain away the actions of an employer, too little and relief offered to an employee who's subjected to harm. Or worse, no space that acknowledges what really happened or the painful experiences. Instead, a narrative emerges in favor of the employer that paints a picture of a problematic employee who's looking to get out of trouble. If you've ever been on the receiving end of workplace discrimination, you know how difficult it is to survive. You've likely spent weeks or months trying to figure out how to get your reputation back, seeking consultations with attorneys, and crying with people close to you. Nothing prepares you for this type of experience. So I want us to take a look at, here's trauma tale number 2. Now that we understand the pervasiveness of workplace trauma, now that we understand the definition of it, let's take a look at trauma tale number 2, Cinderella and the Cruel Stepmother. Here we go.
Ready. Thank you, madam. I'm only mending a fire. The future, could we not pause until the work is done? As you wish. Hello, what's that on your face? Fireplace. You clean yourself up. We'll get cinders in our tea. I'm going to do for her. Don't worry. Let's look so dirty. Oh, dirty Ella. Cinderella. What for you?
Of course, you're too clever. Oh.
Someone we've forgotten. My face.
Oh, it seems too much to expect you to prepare breakfast service and still sit with us. Wouldn't you prefer to eat when all the work is done, Ella? Or should I say Cinderella?
And all of a sudden, it seemed to her that But her stepmother and stepsisters had indeed transformed her into merely a creature of ash and toy.
Okay, so there Cinderella is in a workplace trauma. Talk to me, tell me, what physiological and long-term impacts do you imagine Cinderella experienced as a result of her workplace trauma? You're welcome to unmute yourselves too if you want. Andrea said, poor self-image. Oh yeah, thank you. Thanks for saying that. Rose said, anxiety, lack of confidence, confusion, sadness. Absolutely. Remy said, self-image and self-worth issues, feeling like there was no value in her. Absolutely. Peggy said she was able to rely to the relationship and modeling of a caring mother as well as her training. Okay, thank you. Oh, Doris said withdrawn and lack of trust. Phil said destroyed. Lori said lack of trust. Liberta said low self-esteem and low self-worth. Montina said isolation, low self-esteem and uselessness. Lorna said not feeling quality enough. Kim said inferno. Wow. Thank you. Awesome. So even all of those pieces, I think we often think that we are immune. And by the way, this is not unique to workplace trauma. It's unique to really anything. When I go and train, I've trained probably 200 NAD schools in bullying prevention. And when I train them, there is still this pervasive thinking that because we are an Adventist culture, because we have Jesus values, that we are somehow insulated from having sort of these bad things that we think of being in secular work environments or secular public schools. And yet workplace trauma exists everywhere. And so what I'd like to ask you is if you can take, and then I'll give you a 5-minute break after this. If you can take this toxic workplace test, right? So I'm actually going to start our 5 minutes. I'm going to let you finish this. This should be a link. See if you can click on it and if it'll take you there. Otherwise, I can try to put it in the chat. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you're able to click on it and if it takes you to the link. Yes, awesome. Thank you. Good. Okay, I'm counting down. I've set my timer for 5 minutes. You have 5 minutes to take this and do a little bit of a breather, and then we'll move on.
I'm not sure, but I think it might be a pop-up blocker, but it won't let me do anything when I click.
Me neither. Can you put it in?
Struggling? Yeah, sorry about that.
Can you put it in a link in the chat?
Yep, 100%. Give me 1 second. We'll do it.
The only way I could see Howie more often is if I took him home with me. And I am following the instructions to each and every egg
What?
You have a Bluetooth connection, a BRPT.
A Bluetooth
If you look
connector?
at Bluetooth on,
Are you saying, do I have an actual
no, if
connector?
you look on your Bluetooth, does it show a PRBT?
All right, links in chat, my friends.
So the part where it says send your results to your email, do you actually put your email in there, or that's just part of the test, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, if you want to see your results, then you can put your email in. It won't come to me or anything. It's, confidential, but it might break the data down a little bit for you.
Okay, interesting. Thank you.
Okay, my 5-minute timer went off. Give me a thumbs up if you still need a little more time. Okay, we're good? Okay, all right. So when we're thinking about, now that we really have this concept of what workplace trauma looks like, here are the tools, right? And I think, we've looked at workplace trauma for the employee, for the educator, but for us as leaders, it's twofold. There's workplace trauma for us leaders and administrators and principals. Two types of trauma can happen. Being the employee can be traumatic, and then being the boss, because you're both, right? So that can really be traumatic. And I thought I would show, I'm an avid Office watcher. It is really an addiction. In fact, I turned 40 this year. And for those of you who watch the show, my husband threw me a surprise birthday party with a banner and brown balloons that said, "It is your birthday." So those of you who watch the show, you recognize that. So this is a clip from The Office where the boss has been disrespected prior in the day by Stanley, his employee, his subordinate. And he decides, by the way, he's a terrible boss. And he decides he's going to teach him a lesson in order to get him to respect him. So let's see what happens. Trauma of being an employee, right? He was at the mercy of the constituents. So in being the employee, I love this quote from Work Life. "It's hard separating your personal problem from work when it's a place where you may spend 40 or more hours of your week. Without a structural change for you, without the workplace recognizing the harm, it's hard to move through that violation. People are really hard on themselves," right? And I think especially as Adventists, we have such a hard time differentiating between like our personal identity and worth in God and our call from God to do the servant leadership that he has brought us to. That is a hard fine line to walk, and it gets blurred especially when you're going to church with your colleagues and you see them in the grocery store. And our cultures are so small as Adventists. So there's the first facet, being the employee, you as superintendents and principals and leaders. The second facet is the trauma tale of being the boss, right? And you saw Michael really botch that up as the boss there in The Office. And so I'm going to, again, be very vulnerable and tell you a trauma tale of myself in interim superintendency. And it's funny because both Dr. Bishop and Kim Thompson walked through this journey with me. In 2015, I was a very young mommy. I had a 1 and 4-year-old. And we were living in Minnesota Conference at the time, and the superintendent retired. And so the president requested that I become the superintendent. I had done training there, and I was connected to the schools and understood the culture. And I prayed long and hard about it. And frankly, I was too young and too inexperienced. But then the piece of being a young parent as well. So I said, thank you. I am, honored, but I just don't feel like I can do that in a long-term capacity. So I will be your interim until you can hire another one. Those of you who know me, maybe I should say interim positions, and those of you who have filled them are the worst because you have no credibility and they are really tough because you can either do nothing and just hold down the fort, or you can work to make change, but it's an uphill battle because everyone knows you're there for the short term and doesn't necessarily buy into you and your overall plan. So there was an employee who at the time was up in northern Minnesota, right up against the Canadian border. And he had his own one-room schoolhouse with his own children in it. And he really was running a homeschool, but getting paid for it. I mean, that's really what it was, which was fine. It was a rural, we know these schools, right? However, he loved technology. And so for tech class, and I learned this maybe within the first 2 weeks of accepting the interim position, his tech class was people from the community dropping their computers off. His students would fix them and learn technology, and then he would charge the client, the community client, and pocket the money. So for me, it was such an ethical dilemma. There were other pieces involved too, but I read the handbook upwards, backwards, inside out. That education code just became my good friend, as it is for all of you. I had Mid-America Union director and VP for education on speed dial through the whole thing. And it just got ugly and nasty. And I definitely didn't do everything right. But at the end of the day, and I'm just being very transparent, I was the one in the upper hand. I had the power. And I don't think I was trying to yield it, but he ended up, I think, feeling very abused. And I remember walking up to him and saying, "I'm sorry you're hurting." Like, genuinely, I was sorry at Music Fest. And even still, it got very ugly. Eventually, the school pulled out and shut down and created their own, one room school outside of any kind of denominational connection. And so literally a year later, and by the way, this is 2015, so 7 years, and I still have all my documentation, and you can relate to this too. It says, the employer's name, files, and it's a big Google Drive file, and just in case I get a lawsuit. Like it went that badly, and you all can relate. And so about a year later, I was doing a training for a leadership conference, and I had a booth set up, and I bent down underneath the table to pull out some more materials. And when I came back up, there was the board chair of that school that had pulled out standing in front of my booth. And he said to me, "I know things went badly, but you don't have to hide under the table." And I thought, yeah, I mean, and I said, "Well, I wasn't hiding under the table," but the truth was, like, I did not want to interface with any of those board members or those stakeholders or the principal. I just did not want to. And so I think you all can relate, right? Whether it's, NAD teachers convention in Chicago, and you end up in the same elevator, whatever it is, right? Our paths are bound to cross with these people who have either caused us trauma or who we have caused trauma, intentionally or unintentionally. And so for me, I can look at that and say that was a twofer for me. I recognize that I caused work trauma for that employee, and yet I'm traumatized from it too, right? And so in that facet of being the boss, here's what Work Life says: no matter the type of issue a worker experiences, the most damaging environments are also generally the hardest places to report problems. One major factor is power imbalances, which was my situation, between managers and lower level workers. In hierarchy-driven workplaces, workers may find it especially challenging to complain to supervisors. Workplaces should try to create better work boundaries and push for culture change both within and outside the workplace. And I replay that, trauma story all the time, maybe less now that I'm 7 years out, but how could I have done it differently? How could I have helped him save face with Board of Education? Such a learning curve for me. And so being the boss can also be traumatizing. So now when we look at, now when we look at how it impacts our employees, how it impacts us as leaders, both as the boss and as the employee, let's look at tips and tools for workplace trauma, both prevention and intervention strategies. So I'm going to break these strategies down into different facets. And by the way, I know this is being recorded, but I can also send you the notes in the PowerPoint as well, if it would be helpful to you. So organizational strategies, this is you as a conference. Number one, develop a representative group, a conference education office, health and safety committee. And you might already know with COVID, I know Illinois conference, I sit on the health and safety committee for ours. This could, if you already have one developed, fall under a health and safety committee umbrella. So have this committee discuss and explore potential risks of workplace trauma. This group monitors workplace cultures, right? So in a way, you're just sort of keeping tabs on what is toxic, what is dysfunctional, and then that will help you identify who might be at risk for workplace trauma. Secondly, host information sessions with qualified external speakers. So again, we've got this code of silence that we just don't talk about this. You know, HR has instructed us, we don't say the firing word. We don't actually tell them that they're terminated. We don't eliminate their position. All these things, right? And so because of that, we kind of dance around this elephant in the room that exists in our conferences. But really, we need to recognize potential exposures. Just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Employees are must be equipped with coping strategies and resources, right? In the same way that we talk about, here are your benefits. If you need to do FMLA, you know, we don't anticipate you having some kind of, you know, terminal illness or something like that. But in the chance that this happens to you, here is information around it. Create a safe room and or a safe person. And this is where, as I'm sitting here in the Center for Conflict Resolution, the center comes into play. With the organizational structure, it's important that employees still feel heard, even though they might be on a probationary term, even though they're on a growth plan, whatever it is, they still need to be heard. Creating a location and a person, potentially, and this might be an unfamiliar term to you, conference ombudsman mediator, that is specifically reserved for the employee. So side note, but it applies. Okay. I want to share a resource with you. The resource is, the Center for Conflict Resolution is partnered very hand in hand with VersaCare organization, VersaCare Foundation, and you all are familiar with that. They do all the technology grants. They have funded me for the last 9 years. So just beautiful initiatives. And they are willing to train ombudsmen to serve as that liaison between conference HR personnel, you know, conference legal team, and be that sounding board for the hurting employee. So think about that. Another caveat is that if that is something you want to pursue, VersaCare grants are due December 31st if you want it for next school year. So that would be something. Thank you, Randy, for writing that down. So that's an important thing to know. And you can reach out to me. I can help you complete grant applications if you would like. And then finally, implement actions to increase social support for your employees. So, you know, it's so easy for employees to become isolated, especially in a hurting time, right? And so, to me, our educators are already isolated. I call them silo affected. So you've got one room teacher out in Boondock, you know, Gulf State somewhere, or Carolinas somewhere, and they are already isolated. So something that I've been working on with the initiative that I'm doing with 8 different conferences across the NED is something called Take Heart and Teach, which is a connectivity opportunity via Zoom, 1 hour every 2 weeks, that is spiritually uplifting. It's a time when educators can get to know other educators across the NAD, but there's some confidentiality sort of in namelessness, right? They're never going to see this person in their conference, teachers conventions and things like that. And so it's a way to really connect. I've had teachers cry and just pour out the garbage that's happening with their board. So implement actions to increase social support within the educator team. Organizations that just give lip service to these things will have to actually build psychological pathways for the rehabilitation of their workforce if they want to maintain their profitability and productivity. It is a massive call for employers to take action. The burden particularly falls on the employers to be more in tune with their workforce, recognizing signs like absenteeism and presenteeism, as well as low morale and high turnover. These are those red flag sort of indicators that your employee is suffering from work trauma. Okay, so that's organizational strategies for tools to prevent and intervene in workplace trauma. Here are leader strategies. That's you guys. Number 1, explore your own tolerance for stress, right? All of you. And again, that word commodity, I think, applies even more so to you. You are commodities because you are under such intense stress. So being more aware of when others have exceeded their capacity to tolerate stress and offer approaches that can help will come when you yourself understand your own stress tolerance. So an easy Google is emotional intelligence for leaders, and just Google kind of a self-assessment of how you're handling stress. Number 2, provide clarity around recommended procedures and boundaries. So, I was recently in a parent, teacher, principal, superintendent meeting that went very sideways, and I thought, we need a grievance policy for parents to know really how to follow protocol in their concerns around an educator. In that same way, employees and you as leaders need to be very open about that grievance policy and employee code. That was one of the mistakes I made in that interim role is I was not clear in the steps to him. And so it was very ambiguous and confusing, I think, for him. When employees are informed and in the loop, they are less likely to feel threatened and react aggressively. And then finally, recognize that shame, this is powerful, blame, guilt, and judgment may worsen ongoing distress. Protecting employees from stakeholder haters is critical in gifting them dignity. I think that's the hardest thing because we are just in these fish bowls and the haters talk no matter what the narrative we put out there is. How someone processes stress and trauma is dependent on that individual. There's a delicate balance between re-traumatizing someone by forcing them to talk about a traumatic event and being able to process the feelings in a supportive environment. You can tell I did this at 3 a.m. because there's some typos. Okay, and then finally, teacher strategies. Here they are. Number 1, teach applicants discernment. Okay, think back to your candidates, to those interviews. Equipping teacher candidates with the proper skills and questions to ask is essential in them discerning a toxic workplace. Okay, they need to know the right questions to ask when they're interviewing with the school board. They need to be able to ask, the real questions. Do you feel like there's cliques in your teacher team? How do you feel like the communication is from the principal? How do you feel like your team cooperates with each other? Do they have each other's back? Those are the real questions. Let's teach them real interview questions when the tables are turned. They say, do you have any questions for us? Those are the things that our applicants should be asking. Number 2, support the teacher in pursuing a clear internal narrative about the experience. So we can't always control the external narrative that's going on outside of the community, but their internal narrative, how they end up processing that event, is critical. Make it the goal as the employee to clarify for yourself what you experienced. Sometimes it's difficult to see the reality, a situation of abuse. Reality can be particularly confusing because agents of toxicity don't function in healthy or typical ways, right? So helping them, and that's giving them the language, the real language, not, oh, we were downsizing because we didn't have enough, budget for a second teacher or whatever it is, right? It will help them if they have the real language around it. And then finally, recognize the limitations of control. Abuse happens in workplace. And so we think of corporate America, including the nonprofit world, as like being in control and moving people in chess pieces. And yet really, we have to recognize we don't always have control over what happens. And so identifying the pieces that we do have control of. Eileen Meyer from How to Recover from Career Trauma said the worst thing people try to do when they are recovering from a work trauma is try to change their feelings. That is, try to feel more confident, less traumatized, optimistic, positive, and strong. And, I think we even worsen that in Adventist language by saying God has a plan. Well, we know God has a plan, right? But injury and workplace trauma is not in God's plan, right? God had that promise for Jacob and he came through with it. But that trauma that happened with Laban was not in his plan. Work trauma has to be treated as something appropriate and it has to be embraced. Just as we thrive on our successes, we reel from setbacks. So, trauma tale number 6. Carrie and the apology. I'm really opening up to you about all my hurts and ouchies. For those of you who may not know, I am a pastor's wife, and we were serving in a large church that had a large school, and the principal and teacher, so the principal / teacher was someone who really, I don't think ever did anything wrong, but she did do talking, the negative talking, the bashing of the pastor, the bashing of the board chair. And that talking was done actually directly to me. And so in the same way that we have our circles and whatever, I, shared that talking with my husband, who sat on the board chair, and, one domino after another, and we all know how it goes. She eventually was told that she wasn't going to have her contract renewed. And it was devastating for them. And she, her whole family attended church there and attended the school. Her sister was actually on my husband's pastoral team as the children's ministry leader. And so that was very traumatic. And there was lots of confrontation around that. And so, I dodged her for probably 2 or 3 years. And she ended up getting rehired in another school within the conference. And right before we moved, there was a funeral, and she came back to attend that funeral. And I heard the Holy Spirit nudge me and say, you got to make things right. And so I pulled her into, I didn't have to pull, I just requested, and she very graciously came into a children's Sabbath school classroom and amidst the rainbows and the fishy from the ceiling and whatever else we had. I just told her, I am so sorry for how I contributed to, and I didn't have the language around it yet, but to your workplace trauma. What I was able to say was, to your hurt here and to your job and to what feels like a failure. And I recognize that I was a contributor for that. And I'm very sorry. And she was incredibly gracious, and she cried and I cried, and it was very beautiful. And I was able to really put some closure on that as a mess up that I had done. And I think it lent itself to a lot of closure for her as well. And so in thinking and praying about how to talk with you about this, I reached out to a conference superintendent of mine and said, am I crazy to even bring this up? And here was his response. Some of the hardest work an employer needs to do is to let folks go within the context of a closely knit Adventist community without being able to tell people why things happen. It is one of the most challenging parts of our work that many of our superintendents are tasked with. The real story is kept private, both for reasons of employment confidentiality and to help facilitate employees finding help without public embarrassment. Often the community never forgets, and when there is a vacuum of doubt, they have constructed a false narrative about why things happen as they did. Once becoming superintendent, you learn a lot about people's backstories. The best stories are ones that have happy endings. For instance, placing a teacher on probation and actually having the probationary process heal their career. However, many of our cases are gritty and messy. I think it becomes hard for administrators to lean into an open and loving position over time as they become callous as a personal coping mechanism. Sometimes the lines get blurred between what is really critical and what is just annoying to a supervisor. So in the happy ending of Cinderella, in my happy ending with Carrie, here is Jacob's happy employee ending. This is straight from Patriarchs and Prophets. In reply, Jacob plainly set forth Laban's selfish and grasping policy and appealed to him as a witness to his own faithfulness and honesty. Said Jacob, surely thou hast sent me away now empty. God hath seen mine affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked thee yesternight. So he is confronting his employer. He is telling it to him. And check this out. This is Laban's response. As the employer, here's Laban's happy ending. Laban could not deny the facts brought forward, and he now proposed to enter into a covenant of peace. Jacob consented to the proposal, and a pile of stones was erected as a token of the compact. To this pillar, Laban gave the name Mizpah, meaning watchtower, and said, the Lord watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another. With this separation ceased all trace of connection between them. So they had restoration, they had resolution, they had closure. And here, Jacob is actually able to give his peace of mind to Laban. You screwed me over, buddy. You outied me. And yet he was able to come to terms because Laban really kind of brings in reconciliation. And he says, I don't deny what you're saying. You're right. Can we make a covenant right here, right now, and build a token, a monument that represents a closure to this workplace trauma? I shared with you that I've traveled this week, and I have been through, I should have counted before I told you, probably 10 different states since Tuesday, and places that I have never been, like Arches National Park. And we went to Monument Valley, and it was the most beautiful Sabbath I've ever had. Monument Valley, a 4 mile hike with our family through these monuments and the desert. And on our drive from Monument Valley over to Arches National Park, I see this piece of red rock sticking out of the landscape. And when I say landscape, it is not pretty. It is barren. It is desert. It is Arab. I think really it reminds me of Holy Land scenery, if you will. There's cacti, it's sandy, there's no water. And so we stop and I look at this monument, and here it's called Hobbs Wash Monument. And it's a memorial to these four guys, George Hobbs, George Morrill, Lemuel Reed, and George Seavey. 3 Georges and a Lemuel. And they were scouting the way for 250 Mormon pioneers to safely come. And here comes this massive winter storm. And so these guys haven't eaten for 3 days, and the sun is setting and night overtakes them, and they camp down. Remember, it's this flat, arid area, and they find this little tiny gully, a canyon, and camp there with no food. And so to memorialize that difficult time, that time when they were actually looking and putting themselves in danger in order to protect these people that they were caring for, they were in danger, but yet they came through and they survived and they lived. And so they set up this monument, and here's this monument. And George Hobbs says, I cut my name in the rock with the date that I was there. And he later says, because I didn't know if I was going to live through it. And I think when we look at workplace trauma, whether it's us or whether it's one of our employees, there are times, and I have been there, that we don't think that we will live through it, that we're going to make it through. And yet, to be able to put up a monument, just like Jacob did, just like George Hobbs did, is so powerful. And so right now in our last few minutes, I would like you to take a little bit of time. I lost my slide here. A little bit of time and be reflective in your own experiences with work trauma. This is trauma tale number 7. It's our final trauma tale. And I want you to think of you and trauma. And here are the questions I want you to ask. Who have I hurt? And for me, it's both. Who have I hurt and who has hurt me? And you know what? I'll throw this up on a screen, but it may be helpful to write these down because we're going to have a reflective moment. So who have I hurt and who has hurt me? What can I do to bring healing to my own career trauma? And what can I do to bring healing to others' career trauma? Not that you have necessarily caused that career trauma, but you undoubtedly know someone who has experienced career trauma. In one of our deepest, darkest lifetime places, we had a group of pastors / friends / colleagues come and sit in our living room for 3 hours. And they hadn't caused the career trauma. They were behind us. They backed us. They loved us. But what they did to heal our trauma was just sit there. And Tom Fogg, those of you who know him, Missy, Hi's friend, taught me a phrase. And I will always use it from now on, which is, I don't know what to say. And sometimes when we're looking to heal others' career traumas, it can be like, I don't know what to say, but I'm just going to sit here and be with you. So what can I do to bring healing to others' career traumas? So I'm going to give you just a few minutes. And what I'd like to do is play a song as we reflect from Carrie Joby. And here are the words, and I'm just going to read them to you before I let you do some kind of reflective work as you listen to the music. When I walk through deep water, I know that you will be with me. When I'm standing in the fire, I will not be overcome. Through the valley of the shadow, I will not fear. In the midst of deep sorrow, I see your light is breaking through. The dark of night will not overtake. I'm pressing into you. Lord, you fight my every battle, and I will not fear. I am not alone. I am not alone. You're my strength. You're my defender. You're my refuge in the storm. Through this trial, you've always been faithful. You bring healing to my soul. So there with your reflection questions, hopefully you've jotted them down. I'm going to play this song and just have a prayerful moment. You and the Holy Spirit. I don't care if you turn your cameras off and just have a Jesus moment right now. But let him speak into the career trauma that you have or that you've experienced with others. Here we go. Well, before I sign off, and thank you for all your precious comments and for being a safe place to do something that I was frankly afraid to do and fought God on for a few months there, but I am grateful to have joined you. And I just wanted to share one last resource for you. And again, this is something that I love Florida conferences already taking initiative and bringing on a mental health school counselor, which is awesome. And so in thinking about how can we bring mental health services to our students and our educators and our families. My pilot project this year is, as I mentioned before, working with 8 conferences around the NAD, and VersaCare has fully funded all of them in order to make this happen. And I'll just very quickly refer to my website. This is www.counsel-tation.com. And the idea is Counsel offering a school counselor to you and your students and your families and you as leaders and educators, but doing it in a consultant capacity. So it's a website. You're welcome to go to it. And if you do go to it, my friends at South Central, hopefully you won't mind, my South Region friends, in conference portal, maybe I should just show you. Let me just show you very quickly the website. And again, this is pilot, and so it's in development always. But it is www.counsel-tation.com, and it's a way to offer social emotional learning for your students, professional development for your educators, and really a resource for on-demand when you've got, a suicidal ideation, when you've got a kid with cutting, when you've got a school refusal issue, all of those pieces are a way for me to help support you in a consultant capacity as a counselor, Counsel-tation. So I'm going to go ahead and just give you access to, you'd go to conference portal, South Central Conference, and here's the password if you just want to jot it down, SCC 2021, and that will get you in to kind of see the access that you have 4 classrooms. Allows you to come in, and these are all on-demand classroom guidance, social emotional learning videos where me as a school counselor pops up on your screen. Let's say you've got a kid who's having an issue with dysregulation, right? So you're going to sit them with their classroom iPad and they can watch Managing Feelings, or maybe you want to do just a broader piece for kind of career development and self-development for your middle schoolers. So maybe you do a learning styles for all of your 5th, 7th, 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, where they get to watch a video. And then there's an application printable option in the for educators. So there, you're able to go in and just go down and say, okay, I'm going to print out the learning style inventory. Here's the different kinds of learners and posters that I can post in my classroom. So really all different kinds of resources. There's a scope and sequence. This is aligned with Encounter curriculum. It's also aligned with social studies curriculum, and sometimes even it's aligned with our PE curriculum. And then a resource guide, how to use this resource, what are the different ways to use it. And then let's say you have a teacher who is having an issue with, bullying in their classroom. So you can say, why don't you go on to school consultation and do some professional development? Maybe you can get some ideas. There's things about teacher wellness. Hopefully, Keith, you'll share this with me and we'll put that on there as well. And then for your families, you can just use this link. There's no password or anything. All kinds of videos on how to parent in a Christ-like way, videos on coping strategies for academic success, raising upstanders, when your child bullies others, adaptive parenting in a pandemic, intentional parenting for teens, all different kinds of resources that you can just send your parents to. I mentioned Take Heart and Teach, connectivity for those silo-affected teachers. That's twice a month with the subscription service. And then I also send out a weekly educator newsletter with teacher wellness tips, social emotional lesson plans, and the professional development opportunities. And then once a month, I send out a parent kid connection newsletter to all parents of subscribing conferences that has, how to enhance social emotional learning in your home, how to partner with your school, things like that. So please, if you will, reach out to me if this is something that you want to move forward in, because again, this is fully grant funded through VersaCare for next year. They are just believing in this, and it's a matter of completing that application by December 31. So here is my contact information. Would love for you to reach out to me. And let me just, you commodities, if you will, let me pray a prayer of blessing and thanksgiving over you before I close out. Dear Heavenly Father, I praise you that you walk through the valley of the shadow with us, that you promise happy endings, even though these things are not in your intent or your plan for us. Your greater plan for us as servant leaders is to be whole in you. And part of that is being finding restoration, finding peace, finding closure, and helping others find restoration, peace, and closure as well. Lord, I just thank you for each of these precious people that have dedicated their lives to kids, to schools, to teachers, to colleagues, but most of all to you, and how their ministry is having powerful impacts where they are and the domino effect beyond. Jesus, I pray that you sustain them, bring them resilience, and insulate them from damage and attack and injury. We praise you ahead of time for what you're doing, not just in the lives of these leaders, but in the lives of our employees, our students, and our schools. We love you, Lord. Amen.
Mindy, that was powerful. Everybody, what do you say? Is that